Right.
Good morning.
Morning.
Before we begin class, Dad, would you start us off with a word of prayer?
Dear Lord in heaven, we like to again come before you. Give thanks to you for all that it is you do. We love you, God, and everything but good God. It's our we ask God once again to watch over everyone and lead us that we can serve you. In Son's name, amen.
Okay, we're going to continue in our study of Exodus chapter 34 this morning. And in Wednesday's class, Chris discussed verses 25 through 28 and started discussing 29 and 30, so that's where we're going to pick up. We're going to start off by rereading Exodus 34, verses 29 and 30. Exodus 34, verses 29 and 30. And Melody, would you read those?
And it came to pass, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses was not the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him.
Okay, so Moses comes back down from Mount Sinai, and he has with him the second set of tablets that have the 10 Commandments on them, written by God. And we read here that Moses did not know his skin of his face shone. And as Chris brought out on Wednesday, the word that's translated shone here, in the original Hebrew, it means literally horn, or to display or shoot out horns. So we can see from this context that it means to display or shoot out rays of light. That's what they were seeing. It was like he was reflecting something. And Chris brought that out on Wednesday, but how long had Moses been on the mountain this time? Anybody remember? 40 days and 40 nights. How long was he on the mountain when he got the first set of tablets? 40 days and 40 nights. Do we read about him having his face shining when he was up there the first time? Nothing. So why the second time? This wasn't an accident, was it? It didn't happen the first time, and it did the second time. So anybody got any thoughts? Why would this have happened?
Showing the glory of God.
Well, yeah. The answer I expected out of Carl was because God wanted it, but that's not exactly what he said. But yeah, we don't know exactly why, but it's because that's what God wanted. Yeah.
And Moses had asked to see God's glory, so.
And he did,
Yeah.
right? Yes, that did happen. But with what happened on the previous trip, the previous 40 days, Moses had to come back down the mountain because they had made a golden calf. And maybe God wanted to make an impression on the children of Israel this trip when Moses come back down with those 40 days and 40 nights. He wanted to get their attention. Did it work? Did they notice? They definitely noticed. So he comes down from the mountain after 40 days and 40 nights. He has a second set of tablets. His face is shining. And in verse 30 there, when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, what was their reaction?
You're afraid.
They were scared, weren't they? They were scared and they didn't go near him. Verse 30, something we brought out before, and I like to bring it out. When Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone. What does behold mean? I couldn't hear you.
Look at this.
Yeah, it's an attention getter, isn't it? Yeah, pay attention, listen up, yeah. Let's go ahead and look at Exodus 34, verse 10. Same Hebrew word used, and it's used the same way, but let's go ahead and read that. Exodus 34, verse 10. And Carl, would you read that?
Verse 10.
Yes.
And he said, Behold, I'll make a covenant before all thy people. I will do marvels such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation. And all the people among which thou art shall see the work of the Lord, for it is a terrible thing that I will do with thee.
Okay. Who's doing the speaking here? God. God says, behold, listen up, pay attention. I make a covenant with you. And that's the same word and the same idea that we're reading here in verse 30. Aaron and Moses saw Moses. Why? Pay attention, because his face shone. And again, they were afraid to come near him. And if you were there, how would you have reacted? You've been at Mount Sinai for a while. Moses has been up on Mount Sinai many times. And he comes down this time and his face is shining. I think all of us would have the same reaction that Aaron and the children of Israel did. How you doing? You stay over there, Moses. We'll talk from here. Yeah, it's their reaction to understandable, isn't it? Plus, what had happened previous might have had something to do with their reaction too. Okay, what's happening now? And Katie brought up Matthew chapter 17 on Wednesday, and I want to go there and read that because I found that the story we're reading about here, and then we go to Matthew 17 and read that story of the Transfiguration. I think it's fitting that we go there and talk about that. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 17. And we'll read the first 4 verses. Matthew 17, verses 1 through 4. Katie, would you read that?
Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.
Okay, so Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, kind of his inner circle. We talked about this before. He takes them up on a high mountain by themselves. Do we know why they went up on the mountain? Not from Matthew 17, we don't. We won't take time to read it, but then Luke 9:28 says they went up on the mountain to pray. And then Luke 9, verse 29, it says, as Jesus prayed, he was transfigured, or the appearance of his face was altered. So in Matthew 17, we just read about he was transfigured. They went up to pray, and as he was praying, that's when he was transfigured. And what I found interesting, again, when he was transfigured, his face shone like the sun. Does it sound familiar, what we were reading about in Exodus 34? Yes. And his clothes became white as the light. So that would have been like blinding, wouldn't it? And Peter, James, and John, what was going through their mind at this point? Katie, you had a comment?
Well, and when his clothes were white there, it said, and references say that it's white as if no washer person could get them that clean, that white.
Yeah, it was something different, wasn't it? Definitely.
And the attitudes, I mean, these Peter, James, and John, they weren't afraid when they saw Jesus, but then again, like you said, they don't have a guilty conscience of things that had previously happened.
Well,
They were amazed, but they weren't afraid.
Well, we do read about him later being afraid, but at this point, Peter may not have been afraid, but he was unsure of what to do or what to say. We read that. We don't read about that here in Matthew, but either Mark or Luke, Peter didn't know what to say or do, so he just said, we should make a tabernacle for each one of you. Kind of comes out of, Peter's got to say something. That's kind of his personality. But in this account, Jesus' face shines, and who is one of the characters that we see up there with Jesus? Moses, the one who in Exodus 34, his face shone. And I just thought that was interesting that God picked Moses and Elijah, and Moses was one that we read about here in Exodus 34 that his face shone. And in Peter says he's transfigured, and they see Moses and Elijah up there with Jesus talking with him, talking with Jesus. We know that Mark 9:4 specifically says they were talking to Jesus. And do we know what they were talking about? Not from this account, but if you look at Luke 9:31, it says they spoke of his decease or his death. So again, here we see Jesus trying to get advice or comfort from anybody he can, because he knows what he's got to go through, and that would have been tough. He knew from the beginning exactly what was going to happen to him, and now that it's getting closer, you can see him reaching out and wanting more, his apostles around him and wanting some help, but he wasn't getting much help from his apostles, was he? They kind of didn't know exactly what was happening, even though he did. But so Peter says it's good for us to be here, and I'll make a tabernacle for each one of you. Okay, let's continue reading now. Let's read verses 5 through 8. Matthew 17, verses 5 through 8. And Stacy, would you read that?
While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. But Jesus came and touched them and said, "Arise, and do not be afraid." When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only.
Okay, now Peter says, it's good for us to be here. Let's make a tabernacle, for one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. Peter knew who they were. And as he's speaking, we don't read about it. We read about there was a cloud in verse 5. A bright cloud overshadowed them. I think it's Luke's version says that the cloud actually kind of enveloped them, just came down upon them. And when that happens, there's a voice out of that cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." Now again, not only was Moses the one whose face shone in Exodus 34, and now we read about Jesus' face shining, but what did Moses represent? The old law. What did Elijah represent? Prophets. So here's Moses and Elijah, a prophet, both prophets, but looked up to by the Jews. And God says, "Hear Jesus." In other words, God is making a statement here to the apostles, isn't he? It's time to quit listening to these two, Moses and Elijah, the law of Moses and the prophets. You need to listen to Jesus. This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. Go ahead, Chris.
That makes me wonder that if Jesus was transfigured with the purpose of God saying you need to listen to him, if perhaps the reason why God caused the face of Moses to shine was so that the children of Israel could understand that they were to listen to Moses. We can go back to Exodus 19 and 20, and all the display of God's glory on that mountain was done for the purpose of, I want you to make sure that you're listening to Moses. And God says that. And so perhaps that's why the face of Moses was glowing, so that God could say, hey, listen to Moses.
Right. There was more than one thing he accomplished there, didn't he? Not only did he show his glory, but he also let him know that Moses is my guy. Don't be doubting him. He's the one I'm speaking through. Because later on we see the Israelites fighting against Moses, don't we? And all along here, God is making everybody, make sure the Israelites knew, Moses is my man. I speak to Moses. Moses' face shone, he's letting them know, he's the guy. I speak through him. So not only was he showing his glory, but also like letting them know that this is the guy I'm going to speak through. You need to listen to him. Just like God said here with Jesus, you need to listen to Jesus. Yeah, good point, Chris. So when this happened, what is Peter, James, and John's reaction?
They were greatly afraid.
Yeah, they were afraid. Yes. They fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. And if we'd have been up there with them, I think our reaction would have been the same, wouldn't it?
Yes.
You're up there with Jesus, you go up to pray, and as they're praying, Jesus, all of a sudden, his face shines, his clothes are brighter than they could ever be, and Moses and Elijah are up there with him talking, and Peter says, let's make a tabernacle for each one of you. This cloud envelops them, and this voice out of the cloud, hear him. So yes, they were afraid. And it says they fell on their faces. And then Jesus comes to them and touches them and says, it's okay. Don't be afraid. And it's just Jesus there. Again, that's a fascinating story, and especially ties in really well to, I think, with what we're studying about in Exodus 34. Again, like Chris brought up, here in 17, God says, hear Jesus. In Exodus 34, God's saying, hear Moses. This is my man. You need to be listening to him. But this isn't the only, there's more than one time we read about someone's face shining, isn't it? We read about Moses in Exodus 34. We read about Jesus in Matthew chapter 17. But there's other cases we read about the same thing happening. Go ahead, Summer.
Exodus 7 verse 1 and Exodus 4 verse 16. We see God says that Moses will be like God to them, and Aaron the spokesperson.
Yeah, God says that Moses was going to be like God to Pharaoh when that was at the Israelites. I thought he was talking about it to Pharaoh. Anyway, Moses would be like God, and Aaron would be like his prophet. Moses would speak to Aaron, and Aaron would tell Pharaoh. And he said that, so in that way, I'm speaking through Moses. In Pharaoh's eyes, you're going to be like God to Pharaoh because you're going to be telling him what's happening. Coming from him, of course. But let's turn over to Revelation chapter 1. And we're going to read verses 12 through 16. Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. And Summer, would you read those?
And to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, these things says he, which has the sharp sword.
I think you're in chapter 2, Revelation 1.
Oh, sorry. And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. Being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shines in his strength.
Okay, John is speaking, he's telling what he's seen. He was seeing, he had a vision, and God told him he wanted it, well, he was to write it down, wasn't he? Who was telling him to write it down was behind him. He turns around to see the voice of what's telling him, I want you to, I am Alpha and Omega, I want you to write down what you see, and I want you to send it to the 7 churches of Asia. And he turns around, and this is what he sees. Who did he see? Who is this representing? Jesus. One like the Son of Man. We're talking about Jesus. How is he described here? His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes like flame of fire, his feet like fine brass. But we also read in verse 16, his countenance, his face, was like the sun shining in its strength. So in this case, when John sees this representation of Jesus, his face shone. And did it make an impression on John? Yeah, look at verse 17. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. So we see God doing this and on purpose. He's making a point here, isn't he? He wants somebody's attention, and he's getting it, isn't he? Moses' face shining. The Israelites were scared. Jesus' face shining and his being transfigured. He got the 3 apostles' attention, didn't he? And here, John again. Now, John's seen what happened on the mountain, Matthew 17 that we read earlier, and this is John again. And now he sees like the Son of Man, and again, his face is shining. So I find it interesting that we see God using light a lot, don't we? And he uses it very successfully. He definitely gets their attention. He knows what he's doing. But it wasn't just Moses and Jesus. Let's flip over a few chapters in Revelation chapter 10. And let's read verse 1. Revelation chapter 10 and verse 1. And Chris, would you read that?
I saw still another mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire.
Okay, again, we see a lot of angels in the book of Revelation, don't we? But this is one of them. And his angel again, his face was like the sun. His face shone. So again, we see God doing that. He wants us, he wanted attention. And he wanted them to pay attention to this angel, didn't he? But let's flip over now to Matthew chapter 28. And we're going to read just verses 2 and 3. Matthew chapter 28, verses 2 and 3. And Charlie, would you read those?
And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door, and sat upon it. His countenance was like lightning, and his raiment white as snow. Okay, well, you know, an angel was sent down. He rolled the stone away from the tomb that Jesus was in. And it says here, he rolled it away from the door and sat on that stone. But how was he described? His countenance or his face was like lightning. He shone, didn't he? Even his clothes, it says, were, well, it doesn't, yeah, his clothing was white as snow. So again, we read many cases here where God uses white and light to get attention. And we know there's a reason for it. We won't take time to read it because I'm running out of time. But Revelation 21:23, it's
talking about heaven, and it said the city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. So Jesus' face shone, we got angels' face shining, Moses' face shone. In heaven, there doesn't need to be any light because God's glory illuminates heaven. But also in chapter 22, verse 5 of Revelation, again describing heaven, they need no lamp nor light of the sun, for the Lord God gives them light. So again, we see, and we all through the Bible, light and darkness are contrasted, aren't they? Light is good, darkness is bad. And we see here God used light a lot for his own purposes to get their attention. But one last verse before we go back to Exodus 34. Let's turn to 1 John chapter 1 and read verses 5 through 7. Now, we've read these many times before, but 1 John 1, verses 5 to 7. And Joetta, would you read those?
This is the message which we have heard from him and declare to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin.
Okay, God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. When God created the heavens and the earth, before he created the sun and the moon, there was light. God divided the light and the darkness. Where did the light come from? God. So, again, we can see it all through the Bible, light and darkness are contrasted, but God also used light for his purposes. We see that in many cases here. I just thought that was interesting. We've talked about this before, and we've talked about all these cases before, but since we're here studying in Exodus 34, how effective was that? The Israelites were scared to death. They wouldn't, and Aaron, his brother, the one that God chose to be head high priest, was scared to go to his brother. No. I just find that interesting how God uses things to get our attention. And sometimes we need to be listening. It can be other things that's happening in our life. Maybe God's trying to get our attention, and maybe we need to listen to that. Mostly we need to listen to the Bible, don't we? But I found that interesting. I just want to talk about that briefly. So let's turn back to, is there any comments on any of this so far this morning? Okay, let's turn back to Exodus chapter 34. And let's go ahead and read verses 31 and 32. Exodus 34, verses 31 and 32. And Brian, would you read those?
Then Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. Afterward, all the children of Israel came near, and he gave them as commandments all that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai.
Okay, so Moses is kind of standing there by himself. And he's like, hey, come over here. He calls to them, right? Verse 31. Moses called to them. Who answered Moses' call? Who went to Moses? Did all of them go?
All the children.
But eventually they all went, but here at the start it says Aaron and the rulers of the congregation. The rest of them were like, hey, you're in charge here, you go talk to them. But here we see Aaron and the rulers of the congregation. They do go to Moses, and then it says Moses talked with them. After that, verse 32, afterward, maybe after they saw, well, the rest of them didn't get melted or nothing happened, or so maybe it's okay. So they all, the congregation now goes back and comes near to Moses. And then, verse 32, he gave them as commandments all that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. He tells them what God told him while he was up on the mountain. But again, this is, to me, there's a lot of things in the Bible that fascinate me, but because there's a lot of things happening that we don't normally see, do we? God making a point and getting our attention. But here, even the Israelites were definitely, he definitely had their attention here, didn't he? Do you think they listened very well when Moses was going through what God told him? With his face shining like it did? I bet they listened pretty well at this point. We know they didn't listen all the time, did they? But they probably did here. Any comments on verses 31 and 32? There's not a whole lot here to talk about other than I thought it was interesting that Aaron and the rulers went first before the rest of them went. So did Aaron and the rulers have an impact on the rest of the children of Israel? Yes, they did, didn't they? They had an impact on them. They saw, they went, and they were okay. Let's go ahead and read the last three verses here of chapter 34 then. Exodus 34, verses 33 to 35. And Merwin, would you read those?
Until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until they came out. And he came out and spake unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone. And Moses put the veil upon his face again until he went in to speak with him.
So even though they did gather near Moses and listen to him tell them what God told them on the mountain, does it sound like they're still a little bit nervous? To the point where Moses puts a veil on his face, doesn't he? Right? When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. When he would go in to see God and talk with God, he would take the veil off. And when he would come out, it says come out, go in and come out. When he came out, he would put the veil back on. So this was still, the children of Israel still nervous, in my opinion, the way this is worded and what was going on. And Moses could see that. So he puts this veil on to help, so they would come near him and listen. Well, what's he mean here at verse, what I just mentioned? Whenever Moses went in before the Lord, he would take the veil off until he came out.
When he went in the holy place.
Yeah, he didn't always talk to God on the mountain, did he? We read about that before. Remember Moses, I've got it written down here, but I won't be able to find it in my notes. Exodus 33, 7 through 11. He took his tent and set it up outside the camp, remember, and called it the tabernacle. And he would go out of the camp, walk to it, and the children of Israel would watch him walk out to that tabernacle. And when he went into the tabernacle, his tent, and the pillar of cloud would come down to it, and Moses and God would have a conversation. And then he would walk back to the camp. So here, when he says he went in and came out, sounds like that's what we're talking about. He didn't go back up on the mountain every time he talked to God. Sometimes it was right there in his tent. So he would go in, he would take the veil off, talk to God, come back out, tell them what God said, but he would put the veil back on. Any comments?
I had a question, in 2 Corinthians 3, 7 through 18, Paul was talking about the glory of the new covenant and that it's unveiled, and I didn't know if there was a correlation to it being veiled in the Old Testament by veiling Moses' face, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it's talking about. He's talking about this case right here, that Moses wore a veil, so in a way they were, the Jews, it was like there was a veil there. They couldn't get over that there's a new law. There's a veil there that they couldn't see as they should, that they needed to move on. There's an old law, and that old law had glory. Look at Moses, his face shone. That's the old law. But the point of those verses you were just talking about, yeah, the old law had glory, but just the new law is that much better. If the old law had this and all this glory and all the things that we've been reading about here in the Old Testament, how much better is the new law? And to the Jews, there was still a veil there separating them. You could be talking about this veil, it also could be talking about the veil of the most holy place. Either one, there's this veil there separating, and they weren't accepting the New Testament. They're still trying to live in the old law. That's what that's talking about. That the new law was there, and the old law was done away, and the new law is better. Any other comments or questions? Mighty quiet out there today. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into very briefly Exodus 35. Now, from Exodus 35 probably through chapter 39, it's probably going to go fairly quick because all these things that we're reading about in those chapters we've already talked about. We're going to be talking about them giving an offering for the tabernacle and them building the stuff for the tabernacle. And when God told Moses what he wanted, we already studied about all that. Now we're reading Moses telling them. God told Moses, and now, because Moses didn't get a chance to tell him yet, did he? What happened? The golden calf. He was up on the mountain. God told him all these things about the tabernacle, and then the golden calf happened, and Moses had to try to save as many of them as he could because of what all had happened. Now we're getting to the point now, he went back and got another set of tablets, and now Moses is telling them, this is what God wants. There's an offering he wants to give. He wants us to build a tabernacle, and that's what we're going to be reading about here in verses 35 through 39. So it's going to be kind of some repetition. So we're probably going to go through it fairly quickly, but if there's any comments or questions that you have, be sure to bring them up. But let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 3 of Exodus chapter 35. And Tina, would you read that?
And Moses gathered all the congregation of the children of Israel together, and said unto them, These are the words which the Lord hath commanded, that ye should know them, do them. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day there shall be to you a holy day, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whosoever doeth work therein shall be put to death. Ye should kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day.
That was something I was going to do for class, and I forgot it. But here we're reading about the Sabbath day. I was going to look it up and see how many times we've already read about this up to this point. Do you think God's pretty serious about this? Do you think that the Israelites, God's under the impression maybe they're not listening? He's very serious about the seventh day, isn't he? That they were going to rest. The Sabbath, it's important. It's holy. And here we read about it again. Of course, again, they were also told not to make any idols, and what did they do? So we can see why God did repeat himself many times, as he does for us in the New Testament. We read about repetition. Even Peter said in 1 Peter, I'm going to remind you, I'm going to remind you, I'm going to remind you. So we see that here. So Moses gathers the congregation together here in chapter 35, and he said, this is what God has said. And verse 2, again, a reminder of the Sabbath. Work was to be done for 6 days, not on the seventh day, period. It's a holy day. It's a Sabbath of rest. We know Sabbath. What does Sabbath mean? Rest. Yes, it's a rest. So, what was the penalty? In Exodus 20, when God instituted this, we didn't get told what the penalty was. He just said the Sabbath day is going to be holy and keep it holy. What's the penalty for if you worked on the Sabbath day? Death. Death penalty. And then here in verse 3, they weren't even to kindle a fire the Sabbath day. I thought that was interesting. Now, from other places, in Exodus 34:21, which we just read in the last chapter, they were to observe the Sabbath even during plowing time and harvest time. It didn't matter. That seventh day is a day of rest. And even if you remember when God gave them manna, this is before he started instituting the law of Moses, almost there, but did they gather manna on the seventh day? No, they tried to the first time, didn't they?
Weren't they supposed to gather a double portion on Friday?
On Friday, they gathered twice their portion, and they kept it for Friday and Saturday, yes. So, we read about the Sabbath many times throughout this old law because God's very serious about it. Here, Moses is repeating this law again to the Israelites, and that's where he starts. The seventh day is holy. Chris will pick up here wherever he sees fit.
See ya.
Unless you guys gonna move it back over here.
Yes,
exactly. It's obvious you have these feasts
I'm all right. How are you?